one of the reasons that we like writing about teenagers is that you forgive them when they make terrible decisions because they don't know what they're doing and they're figuring it out. But then I think as we've grown older and we've like had to be vulnerable ourselves and realize that grown-ups are humans too, that everyone deserves that kind of grace, not just teenagers. Everyone deserves the chance to mess up and be given a second chance, or to make a bad decision and try to right it, or be forgiven. And so that kind of, I think, threads through our work.
Yeah, and to take the risk to stretch yourself into uncharted territory, to reinvent yourself. I really love that, and I think that that speaks to a lot of people who find their purpose later in life, or their creative identity later in life. It's something that I write a lot about and deal with a lot. There's magic in those moments of untapped potential when we're reaching into a new version of ourselves, which is so powerful.
What does it take to put your life's work out there in a really big way? How much can I do with this one precious life? Welcome to The Selfish Gift.
If you dream of creating work that leaves a massive mark on our culture and is embraced by millions of people, you're going to love hearing the story of my guest today. Stephanie Savage is a screenwriter and a television producer and the co-creator of some of the most iconic TV shows of our time, most famously the smash hit teen drama Gossip Girl, as well as the OC, the Dynasty reboot, Marvel's Runaways, and Nancy Drew. Stephanie's going to tell us all about what it takes to develop a hit TV show. She's going to share her creative process and the story of her rise to success, and maybe even dish a little gossip herself. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Maggie. I'm happy to be here.
Before we get started, I just want to ask you, this is a weird question, but is Savage your real last name? Because that is that's a super badass last name, right? Like, with a name like that.
It got some currency recently, but for the majority of my life, it was not that cool of a last name.
Oh, well, I don't know. I think I'm Maggie Langrick, and that did not seem to destine me for anything like impressive or glamorous. But anyway, did you relate to the characters in Gossip Girl? And were you like a cool kid, a cool teen?
I was cool in my own way. Like, I was not popular in high school. I was like sitting on the floor in the, foyer of my high school, eating popcorn twists with my two best friends, and, going out at night to nightclubs and trying to, act like a grown up. So that part of Gossip Girl I identify with. I did not have headbands and beautiful outfits and, nice, a penthouse apartment. My mom was a single mom. I was me, her, and my sister. I took the bus to public school. It was like a very normal, lower middle class upbringing.
But it kind of doesn't surprise me, because what you're describing about like the things that people did relate to in that series, it wasn't the wealth or the high flying lifestyle. It was the drama. It was the relationships, right? And I think that, would you say like that's what gave the show its relevance and its fascination?
Yeah, when I was in high school, I wanted to be an adult so badly. I was ready to join the world. I didn't want to be a child anymore. And that definitely pervades Gossip Girl. And we would kind of joke because it definitely gives young people, or the show gave young people the wish fulfillment of kind of living a life beyond your years. But it also gave older people the wish fulfillment of being like young and beautiful and having no responsibilities, and also being able to, be glamorous and go out at night and have fun with your friends. So it sort of worked in two directions.
Oh, that's really interesting. I never thought of it that way, but I can totally see that. Yeah. So I was talking to somebody this week about having you on the show, and he said to me, "Oh, my roommate's girlfriend is doing her film studies thesis on the cultural impact of Gossip Girl."
Oh, funny. That's
I know,
awesome.
right? Yeah. So what does it feel like to know that your work has had this just huge ripple effect, not just on the fans and on TV viewers, but also on the industry that you work in?
I love that. I mean, and again, the dissertation may like rip the show to shreds, but that's fine. For me, it's like to create something that starts a conversation and that conversation is interesting and productive. We always felt that way when we were making the show, even if we were showing, kids doing bad behavior, that could start a conversation between parents and kids about like, do you do that? Do you know people who do that? How does it make you feel? Does it stress you out? Like,
Mm.
it's really feeling very comfortable that so long as it was starting conversations are good, whether no matter what people are talking about, the fact that they're communicating, sharing things, asking questions is important. And I think that partly why the show did so well is because it did start a lot of conversations and it resonated in lots of different places. People wrote about it for art magazines. They wrote about it in Vanity Fair. They wrote about it. There was
Mhm.
a French young French woman who wrote her dissertation on the Gossip Girl voiceover, who I had like um, an email relationship with, over a period of time. Like I love that it's reaching into different corners and stimulating different kinds of conversations. Because when I was a graduate student, I wrote a lot about popular culture. I wrote about Charlie's Angels. I wrote about
Mm.
made-for-TV movies about women who kill. I wrote about the Pam and Tommy sex tape. It was sort of taking like a highbrow, critical studies approach and bringing it to these objects that wouldn't normally be considered worthy of study. When I was in school, it was still, we were talking about like Renaissance painting and, how to elevate film and television. We didn't even really talk about that much, but how to elevate film so that it felt like a real art versus lavishing our time and attention and using the tools that we had to talk about these things that were more like low culture, TV shows or pornography or, true
Mm.
crime. Those were things that was pretty rare for people to write about.
Yeah. And I mean, after all, like all of these things are reflections of the human experience, right? And they can all show us something about what it is to be in a body with other people in bodies and moving through some sort of like
Yeah.
social construct. And like, how do you navigate that, right? These are all really interesting lenses. And I think that anything that's, by definition, if it's pop culture, it's popular, right? So if it's
Right.
pop culture, it's something that a lot of people are consuming, relating to, it's part of their world. And so the relevance is, yes, digging beneath the superficial surface of what that thing appears to be. There's always going
Hmm.
to be a more interesting story there.
Yeah.
So speaking of higher education, you have done a lot of it. In fact, am I right that you have a PhD in film studies?
It's a PhD ABD, which means all but dissertation. So I did my coursework, passed 2 sets of exams, but I didn't finish my dissertation, so I don't technically have a PhD. I do have a master's degree.
Okay, but okay, girl, that's a lot. That's a lot of education. That's a lot of education, and I understand. We were talking earlier, and you told me that you actually initially had a plan to stay in academia. So tell us about that part of your story.
Sure. So I grew up in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and went to the University of Toronto for my undergraduate degree. And when I went, I didn't completely know what I was going to do. I was a English and cinema studies double major. And what I discovered when I was in school is that I loved writing. I took as many creative writing classes as I could. I did an independent study with a beloved professor and wrote the short story collection. Um, and then I loved my film classes, and I really felt that the way that uh, academia talked about film was so much more interesting than the way at the time that they were talking about uh, literature, which still at
Mm.
that time was very much like high school, like talking about themes and imagery, and it just felt pretty basic to me versus the kinds of things that were happening in film studies that were using structural theory and psychoanalysis and like just really, complex semiotics, like really
Mm.
complicated, interesting ways to talk about images and meaning versus, the theme of a story. So that gave me the idea that then I wanted to be, I never felt like I could write like be a novelist or a journalist as my job. I just didn't really understand how that would work.
Why not?
I had the idea of like, well, if I was a professor, I could write, maybe I could write popular criticism for a magazine or a newspaper, or maybe certainly no one can stop you from writing a novel if you have an idea, and I could try and get it published. But I didn't really see that as being like, I just didn't understand how that would work as a job.
Right.
So being a professor felt at least like that was a thing. There were, institutions, there were like milestones. If you worked in a certain way, you could achieve your goals. And so to be a professor of film studies was my goal. And then at the time, there was no PhD program in film studies in all of Canada. So I knew I had to go to the United States. And at the time, the University of Iowa had one of the best programs. Some would say the best program. And so I was thrilled when I got in there. And that was a totally different experience of living in Iowa City, Iowa, a small town in the Midwest, and going to this very intense program where I finished my master's degree, which might have been enough for me to go back to Canada and teach undergrads.
For sure.
At that time, I was like, or I could just stay and get my PhD and like see, then I could teach anywhere. So I decided to do that. I did that. And then when I finished my program, I got a fellowship to write my dissertation. And I decided my topic was star scandals at the end of the studio era. And so I wanted to go to Los Angeles to do research. They have some really big research libraries here, lots of primary sources, and it just seemed like that would be fun. So I moved to Los Angeles, and then as soon as I got here, I realized that it was extremely expensive compared to Iowa City, Iowa, and I needed to get a job. But I had no clue how to get a job or like what jobs existed. I wasn't in a production program where they taught you anything about like the contemporary film industry or even like how you made movies or television shows. It was very, esoteric and about, history and the great
theory,
great filmmakers. Yeah. So I did a bunch of research. I went to those libraries and figured out how things worked. And while I was doing that, I came across the fact that Drew Barrymore, who was just in her early 20s, 21, 22 at the time, had started her own production company. And when I was reading about the projects they had, there were like 5 or 6 things mentioned, and they were all things that I was like obsessed with, or, novels I had read, people I loved. And I was just like, well, I have to let them know about me. I could be such a wonderful resource for them. So I wrote a letter, a physical letter. The internet existed at this time, but was, not used for such things. Explaining who I was, and that I was in LA looking for a job. Got a job interview. It ended up to be for an intern position, which didn't pay, which was not my goal. But I also figured if I'm going to learn like what this industry is, like I'm never going to have a better chance. My second interview was with Drew herself. With the company was her producing partner, Nancy Javon, and one assistant. So, and she was in there every day. So it was very hands-on and very a real opportunity to just kind of learn and grow and see how things worked. And it was also very fortunate for me coming from, this was in the mid 90s. So coming from the Midwest, not having a ton of money, feeling very much like I could just be myself at that job, which at the time I didn't even realize like what gift that was, that like I only wore thrift store clothes. I did not own like a pair of jeans or like a white shirt from the Gap, and that it was like okay that I could just wear like some weird, 60s sundress with my sneakers, and that was fine with them. Like no one was like, you need to be professional, or like this is how executives act, or it was a very, very comfortable environment. It was 2 women and a wonderful gay guy, and like it just felt like very welcoming and not corporate. And at the time I was just like didn't think that much about it because I had come from environments like that, but in retrospect I realized how unique that was, and that it was a really great opportunity to just kind of grow and find myself without a lot of pressure to go Hollywood.
That's so interesting. So do you think that that early experience really freed you to kind of like spread out more, take up more space, accept yourself, and maybe avoid some of the pitfalls of like trying to run around people pleasing or stroking other people's egos or trying to fit in a way that felt inauthentic?
For sure. And I think, one of the things when people say to me, like, oh, you got all this education, you should have just driven to LA when you were like, 18 years old. Maybe, but I do feel like all that education, in addition to like a knowledge base, it also gave me a ton of confidence. Like I had taught college for 4 years. I had like lectures with like 300 students. I'd given papers at conferences where people are coming at you with like tough questions and you have to defend your work. So I was really confident if someone said, like, what do you think of this script? I was really comfortable just being like, oh, X, Y, and Z. And, would you like me to write that up for you? And sometimes, again, in retrospect, I feel like, oh, I might have seemed like, a know-it-all or like, overstepping or like full of my, just like feeling comfortable sharing my opinions with people who were like, my bosses or like writers who were whom I had to give them notes. But I didn't really feel that way. And I know, especially being Canadian and then being a woman, that I know I was always kind. I was never like obnoxious with my thoughts. But I did feel like I was okay, sharing things, and I was okay working independently. If someone asked me to do something, I would do it, and I wouldn't need to. If I had a question, I would try and figure it out for myself.
I think that's awesome, Stephanie, because that kind of confidence is creative gold, right? Like, and so many of us spend the first part of our adulthood fighting to get out from under the layer of self-doubt or second-guessing ourselves or permission seeking, just to encounter that confidence to stand up and say what we see.
Right. Yeah. So again, like
more power to you.
It's a long time to spend in school, but it did give me this thing on the other side that just really was just like a very peaceful, calm, like, this is what I think. And I feel pretty clear on that. And I'm comfortable sharing it in a way that hopefully, doesn't hurt anyone's feelings. And maybe makes them feel, really good if I can see something in their work that they're trying to convey.
And bringing value to the conversation. Okay, so the rest of the education conversation, because I know this has a twist in it.
So I was working there and very much enjoying that. And I ended up at the end of the summer, got hired as a development assistant, which meant I was now, I was getting paid, but I also, had my own little desk, and I had things that I read, and I wrote coverage, and I wrote notes on scripts. And that job grew into a director job. So now it's the same job, but I'm like going out for lunch with people. I'm trying to find material that we can develop to a VP position, which is the same job, but just with more responsibility. Now I can have conversations directly with writers. I could work on pitches to then present to Nancy and Drew. And that was a big thing for me, was because Drew would be gone for big chunks of time when she was on set working as an actress, that I could work on finding material when they were gone that I could present to them when she was back. And those, knowing that if there were 4 things that I liked, 2 or 3 of them she would also really like, and those would become projects. So that felt like really good and like a good base to like this. I could do this job for a long time and be happy. And I tried to keep my academic self alive and do 1 paper a year that I either delivered at a conference or got published. But that was slowing down as I got more and more busy at work. And then when we were working on the first Charlie's Angels movie, I worked very closely with McGee, the director of that movie. We had a lot of problems with just getting a draft together that everyone kind of agreed upon and felt good about. But we also had our actors for a limited period of time. We knew we were going to lose them. So we had to kind of start shooting before we knew completely what the end of the movie would be, which is
my God,
not ideal. But it was like, it's a long shoot, it's like, I think it started with like 85 days or something. 60 days into this, we'll know what the movie is, right? And so then we'll be able to do that at the end. And that didn't totally happen. And what ended up happening was we would have rehearsals, and I'd take notes in the rehearsals. And then I was like, well, I could write, like, I can do these changes in the script. I have that ability. And then it was like, oh, okay, now someone has an idea for like a pitch. I'm like, well, I could write that up. And then based on working with Majid, working with the girls, we started kind of making scenes, which then I could write up and put in the script until the point that we didn't really need any writers anymore. And we were just sort of, it was like an internal collaboration, which was, really kind of opened my mind to the idea of like, I'd now been working for 4 or 5 years. I'd given lots of notes on other scripts. I felt like I knew how this worked. And then reaching back to, my younger self that was writing short stories and thinking about being a writer and like kind of merging those two selves a little bit more and using that skill set that I'd been using to give notes and help guide actors to just try and execute, what we needed to do for the project that we were working on. And then in the middle of that, I got a letter from the University of Iowa saying you have 6 months to complete your dissertation. And if you don't, you'll have to retake your comprehensive exams. And the only way I could have finished is if I had just quit my job and, just batten down the hatches to try and do that. And so it was a really big decision. I obviously invested a lot of time in my education. I never quit anything that I'd started. So it was hard, and I definitely felt like a failure to write them back and say, thanks so much, but, you won't be hearing from me again, and kept working on the movie.
A failure for, yeah. Ironic. That is wild. And I'm assuming, you must be glad that you made the decision that you did. If you ever kind of second guessed it or thought about a different path.
No, I definitely made the right decision. In retrospect, I realized I could have written my dissertation much more quickly and painlessly if I had the skills that I have now, my ability to just like work in a much more focused fashion, to like at the time, and I think this happens to a lot of people who are writing dissertations, that you wanted to just be everything and you wanted to be so smart and so clever and like just dazzle people. Whereas if you just like picked 6 examples, wrote it and a chapter about each of them, and then did an intro and a conclusion, you could finish that and it would be great and publishable, and it would, and you'd be on to the next phase of your life, versus putting all this pressure on you to like have it be like so unique and like rethinking, everything that everyone's ever thought.
Yeah.
So sometimes I do think, as a like second or third chapter, I guess it'd be a third chapter or fourth chapter, I don't know that I'd finish it as an academic book, but to finish it as like a coffee table book with some great photos in it, maybe we'll do that.
Oh, you could write a lot of really amazing books, I am sure. Okay, so speaking of writing, I want to talk a little bit about your creative process and about about your creative ethos. So I know that you, in your production company, Fake Empire, that you have with your creative partner Josh Schwartz, you've dedicated your focus is on stories about coming of age at any age. What is it about that life phase or experience that is so meaningful and important to you?
I think for both Josh and I we started writing about high school, with the OC and then with Gossip Girl, which for both of us, I think was a real just time of everything is so intense and everything that's happening to you, you feel like has never happened to anybody else. You're really, when you're that age, the star of your own story in a way that
totally
you're kind of not when you get older and you're working at a company where you have bosses, you're in a family where you have responsibilities and there's other people in the family. When you're 16 years old, you're just like, this is all about me. Like there's the planet and then there's me. And there's a way in which that is incredible for storytelling because the stakes for everything feel very high. You're doing everything for the first time. And those memories stay with you and really shape who you are. So, what the songs that you loved in high school are the songs that you're going to love forever. The memories of the first time you did so many things are tied to that period of your life. And so we both love writing about that, and living in those worlds. And then I think as we've aged and are no longer that age, we've realized that that process of coming of age doesn't just stop when you graduate from high school. That there's other coming of ages in different phases of your life, whether it's falling in love and making a commitment to a relationship, having kids, having a big job where you have more responsibility than you ever thought you'd had. There's lots of moments where you're feeling like, oh, I thought I knew who I was, I thought I knew how things worked, and I'm realizing that I don't. So that's
Yeah.
kind of a way for us to pull through that same thread through all of our work. And I think too, the idea that one of the reasons that we like writing about teenagers is that you forgive them when they make terrible decisions because they don't know what they're doing and they're figuring it out. But then I think as we've grown older and we've had to be vulnerable ourselves and realize that grown-ups are humans too, that everyone deserves that kind of grace, not just teenagers. Everyone deserves the chance to mess up and be given a second chance, or to make a bad decision and try to right it, or be forgiven. And so that kind of I think threads through our work.
Yeah, and to take the risk to stretch yourself into uncharted territory, to reinvent yourself. I really love that, and I think that that speaks to a lot of people who find their purpose later in life, or their creative identity later in life. It's something that I write a lot about and deal with a lot, and I think that that sort of there's magic and in those moments of untapped potential when we're reaching into a new version of ourselves, which is so powerful.
For sure. Yeah, I think to take Josh and I as examples, he had a pretty straightforward path of just he loved writing, he was funny, he loved movies. He excelled in high school and he said, I want to do this. And he went to USC and, wrote a script that got optioned when he was still a student.
I hate him.
And he deserves all that. He was great at what he did and he worked very hard, and, got the rewards. Whereas my path was more just kind of over here, over there. And again, I got lots of accolades and, was good at what I did and felt seen and loved along the way. It was just a lot windier a path to get there. And I'm 7 years older than he is, and we moved to LA the same year. Me when I finished grad school, him to start college. But then 2 years later, I was reading his script that he had sold, as an undergrad when I was working for Drew and Nancy. So but it just took me those 7 years longer to get to the same place because that was my journey. And again, I don't regret that because I think my journey was smoother when I got there because I had some years under my belt and some experience and some confidence.
So I was recently talking to a friend about the distinction between making media products and for commercial consumption and, seeking popularity around those products, and making art as an act of self-expression. I'm so curious to hear your take on this. Where do you think you fall in that spectrum? Do you consider yourself an artist? In what way? Yes or no? Tell me.
Well, that's really interesting because coming from the background that I do and having the friends that I have, there's definitely been conversations around why do you make the things that you make? You have access to the means of production. Why are you making things that are more popular versus, more subversive or transgressive or independent feeling? And my response to that, my hope is that there are transgressive and, interesting things in the work that I'm doing. but I am doing it in an apparatus where you're spending other people's money. And the expectation is that it'll, the hope is that it'll be successful, which means lots of people will like it. So I think that for me, I'm comfortable doing that. I don't necessarily see it as a compromise. I liked writing Gossip Girl. I don't necessarily wish that Gossip Girl was an independent, movie. Like I think that was a version that told that story and explored those characters and like was fun in a way that I'm proud of and don't necessarily like, looking back, there's different creative decisions I might have made here and there. But the idea of not making something for mass consumption and making something for a smaller niche market, I like making things that are part of a cultural conversation that can be in the zeitgeist, that can reach a lot of people. And I have the personality that if a corporation gives me $80 million of their money, like I want to get it back for them, which some people don't. You know what I mean? Like some people are just they're more rebellious than I am, or more like, that wouldn't bother them to like make something that didn't succeed because they were following their vision. Where I feel like, again, it's just my personality is like I want to try and infuse my vision and infuse what's specific about me and what I think about the world, but also in a way where a lot of people can enjoy the thing that I'm making, and it's not for only like a small amount of people. That being
totally.
I just said that, I've always done things, projects with friends whether it's like writing a zine or, something that's smaller and more personal, where you don't have to feel like I have an art studio in my garage where I make my own like crappy collages that I don't feel the need that I don't need to share them with anybody. I don't need to have an art show. I don't need to like sell them for money. And that satisfies that part of myself. There's no success criteria. The success criteria is I went in my garage for 2 hours and did something that I enjoy.
I love that. And I also think, the criticism against popular work is there's often some hypocrisy in there. And there's also, I think, some, let's just say, like self divided against the self, and perhaps even, unhealed issues around what it means to be recognized widely for success. Because every person who enters into, I'm not going to say every single artist, because this is sure not true, but every single person who enters into a professional role in a creative industry would like to find some success, which includes getting well paid, which includes widespread recognition and visibility, which includes creating work that other people consume and enjoy and share and talk about. And that's what this whole entire podcast is about, right? Is like sharing that in a really big public way. And yet what we know is that a lot of people who enter into that do that with such big reservations about like, is this, am I selling out? Is this, should I be doing something kind of that somehow, is it more noble to not be successful, even if I'm making the same thing? Is it more, should I remain an outsider? And I think that holds so much of us back from achieving what we ourselves want for ourselves. So, I think your clarity of purpose is healthy and inspiring.
And I'll say to that because for sure there is like, no one's going to watch Gossip Girl and just go like, oh, this is just like a completely feminist, anti-patriarchal show that has like great values and is going to change the world. It's not, but I hope that it starts some conversations, even if people are criticizing the show, that that those conversations will make the world a better place, that they will lead to other conversations that'll have more of an impact. And because I've struggled with this a lot in my academic years, and when I had students, what I would say to them is just like, I want to teach you how to be a critic so that you can watch anything. You can watch the most vile, horrible, misogynistic thing, and you're not going to internalize those values because you know how to recognize misogyny. You know how to recognize, this is a system and this is how this works. And you can have conversations about it so that it's not hurting you. It's like you're able to take it in, respond to it. You've got tools in both your hands to point out how certain things are working. And so that would be my goal for the world, is that if we all had great media training and had interesting conversations, then we're not relying on cultural products to make us better people. We are better people, and we're having better conversations about, the things that we're consuming.
Mm-hmm. I think that the other thing that that people sometimes get tripped up on when they set out to make work with mass appeal, and lots of us do that, right? But the other place where we get tripped up is fear of failure, because by definition, if I'm going to keep my goals set on just I'm going to do some kind of weird indie thing that nobody's ever heard of, and that's my version of success. Well, if it flops, who's to say that it flopped, right? Whereas if my goal is to have a hit TV show that winds up in somebody else's dissertation and affects, and touches millions of lives and is widely known, and then my failure to reach that is going to be, I don't know, just feel all the more. So I think that there's a lot of there's just a lot of trepidation and around those kinds of criticisms. But my question around that is, how do you know if a concept is going to be popular, talk to me about I don't know, times when you have felt uncertain or certain, or your own sense of where you are in terms of hitting the mark.
Yeah, well, I think that for myself as an artist, as a creator, I put artist in quotes, that I'm as insecure as anybody is. But I do feel as a critic, I'm confident in my opinions, and I do feel like if I like something, then it's probably something that other people will also like. And so I felt that way about Charlie's Angels, the first movie, where I was like, this movie is batshit crazy, but I feel so warm towards it that maybe I'm delusional, but I don't think I am. I think other people will like it too. And then making the OC, a similar thing where it's a teen drama on Fox, and Josh created the OC. He wrote it, and I produced it for the first year, and then joined as a writer. But I was like, I love these characters so much. I think this is such an interesting way to do a teen drama. I don't believe that if people are able to see this, that they're not going to like it. I think they're going to respond to the same things that I'm responding to. And both Charlie's Angels and the OC had big, splashy, kind of commercial premises. And then inside of those concepts were some smaller, more, interesting, surprising
nuanced
elements. That people didn't necessarily notice right away, but eventually people noticed, and those became what made those things, special and break out. And then same when we were doing Gossip Girl, I think that's all. That Upper East Side, New York City world is a world that I've always been obsessed with. I remember the first time I read a Vanity Fair magazine on the bus in junior high, and they were writing about the Von Bülow trial, and I was just like, I can't believe this exists. Who are these people and what's happening? And then, reading whether it's Edith Wharton or Truman Capote, just the worlds of these people, or Catcher in the Rye for that matter. Holden Caulfield was rich. He had really nice leather gloves. He went to prep school. He lived in a building with a doorman and an elevator operator. Understanding, wanting to know more about that world, and that Gossip Girl was such a commercial, fun way into that, where it was also talking about technology and kind of the teenage panopticon of surveillance culture that was very prescient. Like Cecily von Zagazar, who wrote the novel, she wrote it in 2002, and she really was kind of relying on her own high school experience, which was closer to my experience in the 80s. But she wrote about things before Facebook, before Instagram, before TMZ, before Perez Hilton. The idea of Gossip Girl was before all of that. So that also felt like it's a esoteric, elevated world, but it's a super commercial and, like, again, zeitgeisty way of talking about that world.
What was it like taking sort of jumping off from somebody else's this world that she created in her books, and building upon that and kind of going off in new directions with it? The responsibility that you felt to the original intention, or creative license that you felt to kind of embellish.
Those books had a pretty big following. They were well known and well loved. But they also were very heightened in a way that Josh and I didn't feel would translate to TV. As you get deeper in the books, like Chuck Bass has a monkey that he dresses in the same outfit that he wear, and walks around with the monkey on his shoulder in identical clothing. Dan Humphrey was like a punk rock singer who like walked around shirtless. There was an element of where like the books got much broader than we felt like was going to bear, or that we were really interested in telling those particular stories. So we really used the first book as a jumping off point for establishing the characters. We made some important shifts to try to make the characters feel more grounded and likable, which I think helped sort of draw people in. And that idea that, which comes from the outsiders of like things are tough all over, that for these kids, despite all the wealth that they had, they didn't have parents that were in their lives. They were, sort of abandoned to raise themselves. They were under a lot of social pressure to be perfect. These adult lives that they were living with drugs and alcohol and, no supervision took a toll on their, self-esteem and everything else. So it felt like the setup was a great, big, punchy commercial way into this world. And then we could tell our more specific stories that were important to us and the other writers through that world.
And at what point did you know that it was going to be a huge phenomenon?
It was interesting. The show launched the first year, or the season 1 of the show launched the year of the 2007 writer's strike. So we had not completed our first run before the strike started. And because it was also the first show that the CW ever developed. So it was their first original show. They had kind of put a program together, merging the WB and UPN, but this was their first actual show. And so I think we had maybe 10 or 12 episodes that aired before we couldn't write anymore because of the strike. And
wait, this is taking me back to Charlie's Angels. Like you're going in with incomplete material and you're like, we're making it anyway.
And then because they didn't have anything else to show, they repeated those episodes over and over again during the 100 days of the strike. And that really helped boost our popularity. And so they came to us and said, could you do like 5 more episodes once the strike was over, which meant we had to move very quickly. We had no other shows did that. Literally no other shows did that. We were the only show that did more episodes that year. And they did a special, like a behind the scenes of Gossip Girl special that they aired before the new episodes aired. And then that felt impactful. We came back for season 2. And we hadn't liked the marketing campaign that they'd done for season 1 at all. It was just very generic and confusing. The season 2 marketing campaign, or when I think it started when they brought it back after the strikes. We got a second marketing campaign, used images from the show, and it used pull quotes saying like, every parent's nightmare, and all of the bad things that people had said about the show, they used them as quotes in the promotion of the show with these really beautiful lush images from the show, and the contrast of the two, of like every parent's nightmare, and then like these two beautiful young people like drinking champagne from a bottle or whatever. That really like pushed the show into the next level. And then we started in future seasons having cameos of real New Yorkers on the show. And that became a thing where, people wanted to be on it and do it. And then that got attention, in more elevated publications like Vanity Fair. The clothes on the show were incredibly beautiful. Eric Damon, our costume designer, I really think he like created, because for sure he didn't make the clothes for the show. He bought the clothes and curated them and put them on the actors. But then those clothes would like explode, so like a sequin sweater, a headband, a pleated skirt, all of those sort of like iconic elements from the show would then show up in, Zara and H&M or wherever. And
I know. In fact, I think it was there was an article out at the time that said that Gossip Girl was a fashion marketing vehicle.
Yeah.
What did you make of that? Was that intentional, or was that just a side effect of being a cultural phenomenon?
It was a side effect, but I would have loved to have done more with it. And it was a frustrating aspect of it for me because Warner Brothers, who made the show, the way they were set up, they were like, we don't have the apparatus to like make a Gossip Girl clothing line. Like we have, they've got like the DC franchise, they've got Harry Potter. They're like, that's what our consumer products are about. We're not about like, making some, pleated skirts like that we could sell, in a store. But, Anna Sui did do a Gossip Girl collection for Target, which was super fun. And there were some element. Eric, our costume designer, did a little line for Kohl's, a little black dress line one year. But it could have been so much more. And we had, the woman who founded Net-a-Porter wanting to do a collaboration where you could like go on Net-a-Porter the night that Gossip Girl aired and like buy some outfits, and we just didn't have the I'd say the resources or the inclination on a studio level to try and make those things happen. They seem to, now that actually seems like you could probably get that done, but at the time in like 2009, people were just like, what are you talking about? Like, people don't watch TV to buy clothes, and you don't need to like, you don't need to do this. Like, you're doing fine. The show is great. Like, stop coming up with like weird ideas that are just creating work for everybody. But I would have loved to have had a bigger entrepreneurial footprint using that show. And that actually is something I would say for people doing something corporate versus doing something independent. When you do something corporate, you don't own that. Like, I couldn't make that decision to say, well, I'm going to do that because I'm working for somebody else. I don't own those characters. I don't own the actors' images. I'm completely hamstrung by like what their agenda is. So for people who really have that strongly in their personality, where, that was disappointing to me, but some people might have been driven to madness by that. That's something I would think about.
And when was the decision made to I know it's not a reboot, I know it's like a sequel, but the Gossip Girl 2.0, the more recent outing of it, how did that come about? What was your role, and what was it like?
Sure. Well, the finale of the original series ended with a cut to 5 years later, and at the end of that, it sort of told the story of how Gossip Girl, would never go away because there are always people on the outside who want to be in, and people do want to be talked about, etc. So it was kind of set up at the end that like the show could go on with different characters. The device of Gossip Girl could live in a different iteration. And it felt like it wouldn't be less than 5 years because we jumped ahead 5 years at the end of the show. So when those 5 years lapsed, and different people would be like, "What about a movie? What about a this? What about a that?" And nothing really seemed right. And Josh Schwartz and I didn't really have an idea for what the show would be. We knew we could never get that cast together because they've all, gone and done their own wonderful things, and they're the chances of getting everyone together to do a show of them in their 30s is not happening. But the idea of there could be something, so we didn't know what that other idea was. I was like, if I was going to write the show, that's the version of the show I would do. I would stay with the same characters and have them be the ages that they are now. But if it wasn't that, what was it? And we ended up going out to Josh Safran, who had been on Gossip Girl for 5 years, the original one, and ended up as an executive producer on that show. And it felt like he was still living in New York. He was very connected to that world. And we just thought, well, we'll see if Safran has an idea of what his version of this new show could be. And we really loved what he pitched us. And so we took it to, at the time, there were changes in the industry, and it wouldn't be for the CW, it would be for HBO Max, which was also very exciting because we would have a bigger budget, potentially a bigger audience, be on the same platform as all the wonderful shows that we watched on Sunday nights. And so that show had a lot of COVID challenges. We were about to go into production, we shut down, then we went into production we were the first Warner Brothers show to go back into production during COVID, and it was like deep COVID with like masks and face shields and isolation and people eating lunch alone and apples wrapped in plastic. And it was pretty grim. But everybody there did an incredible job in pulling the show together. And getting great performances and getting great scope. And I think if you watch it now, you would never know that it was all done in the height of deepest darkest COVID. And Josh Schwartz and I did not write on that show. We were more, we put Safran in that showrunner position, and we're there to support however we were needed.
And of course, that reboot or sequel, it didn't have the same kind of reach or lifespan as the original series. In retrospect, is there something that you would have wanted to have done differently, other than the COVID challenges? But do you think it was, its moment had passed, or did it perform pretty much as you expected it to, given its relationship to the original?
Well, I think it's just that the kind of specialness of the original show in its originality, that it was the first one, and that it's actually managed to have a beautiful life of like being on the CW, where we never got like huge ratings. We were never like a top 20 television show compared to other shows, just because being on that network was impossible. They have just fewer affiliates. People don't watch it as much because it's younger. Literally younger, like it just was invented. And also the people who watch it are younger, and they were watching the other thing that the show experienced was it was one of the first shows that was really watched time shifted. It was, when we started, shows were just like getting ratings the night that they aired, and then they realized, we have to look at DVR numbers, for the 48 hours, for a week, for a month. And then once you started to add up those numbers, they were big. The idea that young people didn't even have cable subscriptions and didn't have televisions. Like when you went to college, you wouldn't get a TV in your common room that everyone would sit around and watch together, which was my experience. People had their laptops and their phones, and that's what they would be watching on. There was no way to measure that. And so that it was hard to know how many people were watching the show. It turned out to be more than we thought. But then it also had this wonderful second life on Netflix, where tons of people watched that show, didn't even know it had been on any other network. And you really got the benefit that show, we didn't have the word binge watching when we were making it, But we designed that show at the time. The challenge was you have 22 episodes of a show that are going to air over 40 weeks. So how do you keep people coming back to watch it week after week? There might be 3 weeks off at Christmas. There might be a preemption for a sports event or a, who knows. So the act outs were written with like, oh my God, I can't believe someone said that, to get you to come back after the commercial. The episode outs were written to get you to come watch the next episode. So it really was like super bingeable. And then to be able to watch it without commercials and have 119 episodes, it was like a powerful little like glitter bomb, like just
like a dopamine fire hose.
Yeah, exactly. And then you could finally watch it in a way that it was actually probably like always meant to be watched. So tons of people have watched the show for the first time only on streaming and didn't even know that it existed in any other form. And now it's on HBO Max, and you can watch it in that same way.
Amazing.
So that was all just like because of the moment in history that it was existing in.
And that's always a part of our stories that we know we can't control, but that has a huge impact on how things go for us, right?
Yeah.
Stephanie, what really strikes me is about this conversation is your I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the modest ambition of becoming a film studies professor or a professor of some sort. And then this wild financial, cultural, creative success that you've experienced. I mean, a lot of us, we dream about doing something amazing or big with our lives, but being the co-creator, executive producer, writer on the kinds of shows that you have been on are just outside of most people's wildest dreams. So I really want to ask you. By the way,
like I never dreamed that big. I'm way off the like end of my map of like my biggest dream I ever had.
Okay, well that's my question basically is like, what does this mean to you? What is it like to be living this life, and what has been, I suppose, the best thing about it, if I can ask the most obvious question there? But what is great about this journey that you've had?
Well, I mean, gratitude has kind of become a cliche, but I have just a tremendous amount of gratitude. I wake up every morning just like so delighted to like just be in my house in my comfortable bed with my dogs. I had a friend come by, this was a couple of years ago now, but she noticed I was obsessed with Rebel Without a Cause when I was in grad school. She was my grad school friend. And she looked up, and you can see the Griffith Park Observatory from my backyard, which plays a big role in that movie. And she goes, was it just like your life's dream to like live as close as you could to the Griffith Park Observatory? And she was kind of like mocking me, but I was like, yeah, I guess it was. Like, I guess, there was so much about Hollywood and Los Angeles that I just loved and wanted to be close to. And when I wake up and can see Griffith Park Observatory from my backyard, like that just makes me, that's my dream fulfilled, is to be able to like, I loved this place as an object of study, and now I get to like participate in it as a creator. I had a moment when I was younger, still working with Drew, where I went into it was like a fancy lunch restaurant, Kate Manalini's. It's not there anymore, and Billy Wilder was having lunch, and I kind of just like I started crying, and it was this moment of like, that's Billy Wilder, who's like one of my all-time idols, and then but B, like, oh my God, like Billy Wilder works in Hollywood, and I work in Hollywood. Like, I'm here on a work lunch. Like, I'm in that world. I've like pierced the veil, and I'm sitting next to him in a restaurant where I'm not a tourist. Like, I'm meeting someone to talk about a project, and just that feeling just kind of like knocked me back. And then I wrote Billy Wilder a letter, and he wrote me back, and I have that letter framed on my wall.
See, that's what I'm getting. I think from it's almost like maybe it's a formula for success or for happiness, or what I'm experiencing in you is this amazing mix of kind of like boldness and confidence, but also just humility, surrender, and appreciation. Which that's got to be the magic formula for a good life.
Well, thank you. That makes me feel very good. And I do think, I mean, when I've been asked to speak at colleges or, to young people, just that what was my North Star or what drove me. It does seem like overly simplistic, but just the idea of following your passion and just like, what do you love? Like, let the things you love be a magnet and let yourself be drawn to them. And you don't have to need to know how that's going to work. I think I'd have a really different point of view, and a really like I'd just be a different person if I was like, I really want to be successful. I really want to create television shows. If I don't do that, I'm going to not be happy. I never had that thought in my life. I was just like, I just want to be close to things that I love. I want to like be engaged in interesting conversations with people I respect. I want to be creative. Like I don't know what that's going to be and it's not results oriented.
So what are you working on now, and when can we see it?
Well, Josh and I wrote a show for Apple called City on Fire based on a book, and it's coming out on May 12th on Apple Plus, which is international, so you can watch it everywhere, even in Canada. We spent 6 months last year shooting it in New York. We're really proud of it. It's definitely a coming of age at any age story. It's a whodunit, which is the first time we've actually done kind of like a mystery with there's cops and an investigation. And it's a really fun world where the girl who gets shot in the opening is the connection between a wealthy Upper East Side real estate family and downtown squatters that are deeply involved with the New York music scene, and like how those worlds twist into each other.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Well, I'm definitely going to check that out. And gosh, what a really revitalizing, illuminating, fascinating conversation. I am so entranced by your depth of thoughtfulness about this work that, as we said, has been this sort of sugary sweet piece of kind of pop culture candy, and there's so much more under it and behind it. So before I let you go, I would love, if you're willing, just to do a very quick, because we can't get away from a conversation about Gossip Girl without a little bit of gossip ourselves. So we're just going to do a super quick round of yes, no, maybe so. Okay. Are you ready?
I might have to throw some no comments in there, but we'll see.
You can absolutely throw no comments in there. Okay. Was there a lot of gossip on the set?
Yes.
Were there any divas in the cast?
Maybe so.
Do you think your personality is similar to any of the characters?
Yes.
Who?
For sure, Blair Waldorf has a lot of my personality in her.
Did you keep any clothes from the show?
No, we didn't get to keep anything. I actually have Blair Waldorf's desk that I had to buy from Warner Brothers when the show ended.
Okay. Did anybody in the cast ever hook up that you're aware of?
That's public knowledge, yes.
Right. Did anybody in the crew ever hook up?
I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to that.
And if you could do it all over again, would you do it the same way?
There's definitely some story changes that I would do differently, or some stories that I would tell differently. But at the end of the day, I'm really proud of the show. And again, I hope that when people find things about it that rub them the wrong way or feel like, they could be different, that is an opportunity to have a conversation about it and use their own critical skills and their own feminism and the tools that they have with that to have an interesting conversation about what a better version of Gossip Girl would be.
I love it. Well, thank you. Thank you, Stephanie Savage, for your time, for your thoughtfulness, for your transparency and openness. This has been one of my favorite conversations. City
you.
on Fire is coming out on Apple TV
Apple
on
Plus,
May
yeah,
12th. Apple
yeah.
Plus on May 12th. So everybody go check it out. And we can't wait to see what you do next. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you.
I really hope this conversation has inspired you to give so much of your gift to the world that it expands you into your greatest possible version of yourself. Remember, it's not selfish just because we also benefit from it. And here's where I get to make a selfish request. New podcasts need all the help they can get. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate the show and subscribe to us on your favorite platform. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Selfish Gift Podcast. And send me a DM. I'd love to hear how you're sharing your gift with the world.